Tom Gilmartin. We're finally doing it. We're finally doing the podcast. We're finally doing this. And I feel like every time I talk to you, I kind of want to like hit record anyway, just because there's always some sort of gold that comes out of it. But, you know, I've had the opportunity to get to know you really, I would say really well over the last year. But for the person that doesn't know you yet, can you just share a little bit about yourself?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for inviting me in. I feel the same way about you too. We met at USC. I don't even know, about a year and a half ago at a career panel, and congratulations on everything you've launched with Blue Light and the acquisition and everything. So
thank you.
Kudos to you, but also thank you for the invite. But a little bit about me. Let's see. I am someone who spent a career in advertising, and then another chapter of a career in Silicon Valley. So spent my youth as someone who grew up in a house where most of the folks in there were like either in like finance or medical research. And I was just the kid that was always drawing in the corner, you know, and I would much rather be in the corner with a pen and pencil and a pad of paper than maybe anything else, and then learn how to play guitar. So I was that kid in the family tree that was everything and all about creative, where most of the family just didn't know how to connect necessarily with that as early on. But I'm just somebody that I think very, very fortunately was able to parlay that into a career. And it's been the most rewarding career I think I could have ever asked for. Sometimes the most rewarding and sometimes the most painful, meaning as a creative, you know, your heart can get squashed sometimes. But I think very, very fortunate to have landed in that space and learned a lot. And most recently, as you know, the latest focus has been really taking a lot of those hard-earned lessons and scars and translating that into helping a lot of this next generation as they find their footing or find ways to unlock their own paths and careers in the advertising or creative space.
Yeah. So something that I just learned about you is that you used to play in bands, which is amazing. And did you say that it was an ex-girlfriend that came up to you, or a friend that was a girl that was playing in another band and said, hey, I'm working at this advertising agency, you should check it out? Like, I'd really love to learn about that, because just even from my own background, I never thought that I'd be in marketing and advertising, and here I am, you know what I mean? So I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah, I mean, the first band I was in, shout out to the Hormones with Feet. That was our band in high school in 9th grade. And at that time, it's interesting. I mean, you know, you're sitting there, you're like 14 or 15 years old, and you're trying to write a song. And the drummer wants to do like 14-second fills. And you got a bass player that wants to, you know, have a lead. And then you got a singer, and then maybe someone else as a singer. Like, so early on, you learn how to be an affection or a cross-functional partner. You know, we say the word cross-functional partner right now. Let me rephrase that. It's like, to me, like, it's interesting, some of the things you learn young as a teenager that you have absolutely no idea that it's going to help you in your career. So sitting in a garage working with a garage band of a bunch of kids, and you're trying to figure out how to make a song, and the bass player has a different vision than a drummer, and the drummer has a different vision than the rhythm guitarist or the lyricist. But you figure it out. And maybe it sounds horrible, but you're proud of it and you're excited about it. So some of those things, for me, I had no idea were going to be helpful to me as a creative director. Or even I was singing a bit in that band. Being able to get over your stage fright and go up and sing in front of a crowd, whether they're into it or not, right? Then you go pitch a client, and if that client's like stone-faced, you're like, I've been here before. I know how to get through this. And you figure out a way to work the crowd, right? But I love hearing how people land in their careers, because it's never like how you'd expect to read it in a career book. There's always some random surprise moment or synchronicity or something that was totally unexpected. And for me, you know, I came up in a household where, you know, the track was like going to business or going to medicine or something. And I was at university, and I was in business school, and I didn't know that I have dyscalculia, which is basically dyslexia for numbers. So here I am in a stats class, in a final, realizing that I knew 3 questions out of 100. And I'm like, I'm going to get kicked out of this school. So I drew me being crushed by numbers in this blue exam booklet. And it was, I'm like, I'm going to make it 3D. And I had like, it was a fisheye perspective, and the letters went up, or the numbers went up like 4 stories above me being crushed like by the weight of it. And I turned it in expecting to get, basically kicked out of the school. And I'll never forget the next time I went into class, the professor was like, "Hey, Gilmartin," and I'm in a big class, come up here. I'm like, well, this is it. I'm going to be walked off campus. And he said, meet me in my office after class today. So I walk over, and he said, great work. You got an F on the exam. But I'm going to walk you over to a totally different department because you're just in the wrong school. Wow. So I wish I remember the name of that professor, wherever he is, a huge shout out and a thank you, because very easily he could have just been the shoe that kicked me out of the school. But instead he opened my eyes, and I ended up going into marketing, and, had a follow-up conversation with my grandfather, who was that business person that said, you do music, you do art, have you ever thought about the career of advertising? And it stuck in there, but I hadn't really thought too much about it. And then the night that you had asked about, I was playing a gig at a bar in Boston. Maybe it was like the Rat or something.
Yeah.
And a girl in another band was saying, have you ever, considered advertising? I was like, I just had a conversation about that. And she said, I have an internship at an agency called Hill Holiday. You should come down and apply, which I did, and I was able to get in. But never in a million years would I have ever put that together unless some random conversation in a dark, dingy bar in Boston happened.
That's so incredible because, my experience in at least high school, I didn't end up going to college, was like if you weren't doing well, there was no guidance as to where you could potentially do well.
Right.
It was just, it was kind of this checklist of things that you had to do. And being able to have somebody to identify that and then care enough to like take the extra effort and put you somewhere else. I think it just speaks volumes to, for one, his character. Maybe one day we'll remember, and we'll try and find him.
Yeah.
Do you think that moment, because like what I know about you is that you like sharing, offering resources and helping other people seems to be like part of your nature. Were you always like that? And did that one moment with that professor kind of change how you think about, how you interact with people and the value you give to others?
I think so. I probably have some form of dyslexia. So I know I have dyscalculia. So I always felt like I had to work 3 times as hard. So like another story from the trials and tribulations of high school was I was in calculus. And again, being someone whose numbers like float all over the place, I didn't know how I was going to get through calculus. So I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and the deacon that was our teacher knew I could draw. And he said, "Hey, Gilmartin, you don't have to do homework if you do a funny drawing and make us laugh. Then I'll throw it up on the acetate," which is like how long ago I went to school. So I would just do like a Far Side type funny thing, whatever was happening in school or in the city of San Diego. And I didn't have to do homework, which I thought was like, oh man, this is the best thing ever, right? Until you go to school and college and they're like, hey, we're going to use all the stuff you learned in pre-calculus. I'm like, can I draw? And they're like, no. But I think being someone where the way my brain learned or the way that I absorb information didn't necessarily fit the mold. I think I knew that I had to find my own ways or work potentially a little harder or smarter than, people who were just more efficient in like absorbing information. So I think that lens has always like given me a sense of empathy when I see someone that maybe is struggling a little bit or like, has the tenacity and the talent and the wherewithal, but maybe they just don't have the bridges, or they don't have the tools, or they don't have that. To me, that's paramount, because there have been countless people through the course of my career that have like extended their hand or their help, and it's been transformational. Like, I can't even remember them all.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Man, that's such a stark contrast to sometimes, maybe not necessarily what I've seen, because that would discredit so many people like you and other people who have helped me along the way. But I've also seen the other side, where people are so unwilling to help people, and they think that their value is in gatekeeping information that can help a whole organization sometimes. And that's really heartbreaking for me. You don't give any of that vibe. And I'm curious as to, like, that first internship that you got, that sort of thing, like, what were some of those big moments where you're like, oh man, now looking back, where now you're teaching other people, what were some of those moments that were like, yeah, that shaped how I interact with people, starting in their career?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say a lot of it started with my family. I had a grandfather who was friendly with every person, didn't matter where they were. He just became their friend. And at his funeral, it was like the entire town came. Everyone from the people from the diner to the people that worked with. And I think I learned how that approach, and my father is very similar as well. But, you're never a stranger if you surround yourself with friends, meaning you care enough about the people that you interact with in life to at least be friendly and learn something about them. So that always has been a lens that I try to apply, no matter what it is, if it's career or not. But I have to say, when my first creative job, meaningful one, was at Chiat Day. And that place, I learned so much in 4 years there, but I also didn't sleep much in those 4 years. Right. So they called it Chiat Day and Night, because the expectation was you'd show up every day and every night. And I remember, if I remember correctly, in the welcome packet, it was like, if you don't bother, or if you don't show up on Saturday, don't bother showing up on Sunday. It was kind of the approach, right?
In their welcome.
In the welcome packet.
Wow.
But, you go there with, all right, I'm going to go and I'm going to grind and I'm going to learn more in the time there. It's going to be like 10x where I might be somewhere else. And when I think about that decision, it was the right decision at that time. I was single. I wanted to get my career off the ground. Right now, like, the way I value time and balance, like, I have a family. I wouldn't make that decision in the same type of way. There would be different factors, right? But when you're asking about some of the influences early on, I had some incredible mentors in that hallway. Incredible. I was a kid fresh out of advertising school. My partner and I had a writing partner. Shout out to Neil Levy. And I had a creative director. Shout out to John Soto and Chuck McBride and Todd Grant and Jeff LeBay and Scott Wilde. Some incredible industry, like, giants who they very easily could have dismissed us as a junior team. They could have just said, you don't know what you're doing. And and Eric King too. But to their credit, if we could show up with the ideas and we were willing to put the work in, they treated us like anybody else. And we had swings on some PlayStation spots and Levi spots and things like that, where they very easily could have just picked those and said, those are ours. But I think, again, I learned a lot from some really, really strong creative leaders about how to be gracious and to let the best idea or the right idea for that moment win, versus using clout or seniority to just kind of push people out of the way.
Yeah. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'm curious as to if you also got the opposite experience from people that were there, and how did you break through that?
Yeah, I think, in some hallways, it is literally a shark tank. So we would have instances where you'd be excited about getting a brief. You're so excited about it. And then you realize that brief was meant for this one team, and then other people had photocopied the brief and weren't necessarily on the assignment, but they were going to gun for the idea too. So, or even a brief landing on your desk and then it's not there when you get there because someone else is like, oh, we'll take that, right? I didn't see it that much. It does exist, but I mean, look, I feel like one of the blessings and best parts about being in a creative endeavor, I think for the most part, people who chase that dream or build into that body of work, like appreciate creativity and being around other creative people. And I hope when someone shines because of an idea, they appreciate that, like, versus maybe some other, and again, I haven't been in other businesses where maybe it's just about the bottom line, or maybe it's just about like the number you're delivering. And maybe that's a little bit more challenging. But, I would say that I learned as much from the great human first creative leaders as I did from the folks that maybe didn't fall into that category. Yeah. So when I started leading teams, I always kept in mind not only the lessons I learned from the great creative directors or the great leaders that treated us with empathy and kindness, but I also always on the other side was like, oh man, I will never do what that energy did to me or our team. I never want to do that. So I you have those two perspectives typically when you're making decisions on a daily basis, especially when you're leading a team.
Yeah. Before we move on in the conversation, I want to give a big shout out to Jonathan Hanson over here. I should start calling you Jonathan Handsome because
I like this.
I don't know. That just came out of nowhere. But to the listener, if you heard these Slack messages going off, so I have everything on silent and I forgot that Slack makes it through. And I'm like, he's over here crawling under the camera, making sure that's off. Like, thank you. Yeah. The best in Orange County. Anybody that needs any videography is fantastic.
He's looking for an SG too, I think.
And looking for an
SG.
If
anybody has a loved SG for sale, reach out. Yeah.
So you mentioned that like you were really excited to get a brief and you'd have a shot at the idea. And so my vision of this as you're talking about it is very like Mad Men, I guess. Like you'd have that big pitch and it could be over a dinner table and it's just an idea of an angle sort of thing. Today, I would venture, I haven't been in the room where that type of pitch and that type of idea is like such a big moment. I think because there's so much content out there now. Yeah. How have you seen like the formation of an idea or the creative process change from when you started? I know that's a huge question. Yeah. From you started to like today.
That could be a 2-hour
conversation.
Which is
I'll sit back and grab my coffee real quick.
Well, look, I feel so lucky, truly, to have entered the industry when I did. So I'm a dinosaur. I got in like late 90s. And at that time, we truly believe, and I think you still can do this, but we believed that everything we were putting out had the potential to shift culture at a massive level. And there were all these agencies like Wyden and a lot of Chiat too, but they would do a campaign and really from like the bottom of their heart and spirit, it was like, we are going to shift things. We're going to move things. But I think part of that was because, there were like a handful of channels that if you had a media buy that owned those channels, you pretty much were like on the main stage. Out of home, radio, like we only had, and experiential, we only had a handful of things that we had to dive into. When I started working in a space where we were truly leading like 360 or like full-fledged campaigns, I mean, like I remember we would be sitting in a conference room, when I worked on Lexus, we had like 2 weeks for the first round of a print campaign. That was the only thing we were working on was like Lexus brand print.
Amazing.
So I just remember a partner, where do you want to go today? We'll go and get some, we'll get some breakfast and maybe we'll kick around some ideas and I'll go to Hennessy and Ingalls and go do some visual reference. And then, oh man, God, we got a check-in next week. We better start cranking, I'm definitely over exaggerating. I'm sure we had a bunch of other stuff going too, but the clock gave us time to sit with ideas. And I think at that time, the pressure was, I remember we did a campaign for Lexus Hybrid that we were launching that brand. And I, as an art director, we were doing type treatments. And I think I had like 250 printouts of variations of like one or two typefaces and just looking at them for like 3 or 4 days and trying to fine tune and make sure the type was right,
Yeah.
And where you could argue that, does it need to be that in depth? And, is the kerning going to really catch the eye of the consumer or whatnot? Should we speed through it? But I think probably somewhere in the middle makes sense. Meaning what I hope doesn't happen with the speed that creatives are forced to work right now. And I also think with like AI and the things that are incredible tools, I'm so excited to see people leveraging them. But I think there is an art to this storytelling technique. There is an art to the artfulness of communication. And some of that does take time and does take extreme focus. And then also it takes like another human saying, that's not good. Because AI has a tendency, I was just listening to a panel yesterday at AWE, and one of the panelists was saying, I miss working with humans on concepts because if you trust that partner, they'd be like, I think we can do better.
Yeah.
It's cool, but like, I don't think that's right. Where a lot of times when you're working with AI, it's going to be like, you're great. This is great. Here's another build. You're great. So I think it's interesting if we start having some of these really powerful tools that can help our ideas get better. Some of the best ways our ideas get better is someone saying that's a bad idea. So how do we make sure we don't lose that? And sometimes having time for those conversations where you don't feel rushed. God, we got brief this morning. We have to show ideas by 2. It might be like, well, let's just get through it. Versus, we got a little time. Like, is this good enough?
Yeah. That's funny. You talk about a 2-week turnaround time. I'm like, wow, that seems like an eternity. I can't remember the last time we were asked for like an asset in like 2 weeks, and we have to. They're like,
different time.
What do you mean you can't do it in like 45 minutes?
Yeah.
What about AI? That's funny that you mentioned that. With you kind of alluded to the confirmation bias of AI.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I was asking like ChatGPT if I should do something in a certain way. And they're like, yeah, here's the pros, da-da-da-da. So it's a net positive win is how it does it. And then I asked it something really ridiculous, like the equivalent of like, sorry, Mom, should I send a nude to my coworker, blah, 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 blah. And it went through pros and cons of the situation. I was like, okay, but what would you do? And it said like, no. I was like, okay. And I told it like, that was just a test to see if you're just going to say yes to everything I do. Because that kind of thing, I feel like a lot of AI will gas you up when you shouldn't be. Or maybe when you need, like you mentioned, another human on the other side. I'd love to just like give a quick shout out to some of the partners that were like that you've worked alongside with, the people that told you no and brought something extra special out of you.
Wow. I mean, one of them was the panelist I just mentioned, Bob Yarkey, who I worked with at Facebook and Instagram, who now, I would check out his stuff on LinkedIn, is incredible. Also another person, Kaz Maurice O'Leary, folks that I truly trust. And, when you throw an idea out there, I think there's an art to killing an idea with kindness. And they've been master of, but like some of my partners in the past, Neil Levy, Steve O'Brien, God, so many of them over the course of my career, Kim Nguyen. But I think, I think it's really important as a creative person. And I think, any creative pursuit, whether you're doing music or you're doing advertising, or you're doing, shared creative development. I think the key is surrounding yourself with people that you trust so much with your idea, because truly you're putting your heart on the table, right? If you're doing your job well enough, you're stretching yourself, emotionally, spiritually, idea wise, to like, you're going to feel pretty raw when you put it on there.
Yeah.
If it's really generic, it's like, hey, here's an idea. But when you really put yourself out there and you're really stretching and you've worked really hard on it, you're putting it in the hands of other people. Now, the easiest thing for someone else to do is, oh, that's great. Good job. Right. I remember someone that was a leader in an organization I was in said probably the cruelest thing you could do for someone you respect and care about is tell them their idea is great when you know it's not. Yeah. That is probably one of the cruelest things you can do. And that was Mark Darcy. So shout out to Mark. But I think what he meant by that and what I took from that was, it's hard to be a good partner sometimes because you can see the love in someone's eyes and like, oh, this is it. We got it. It's hard to be like, oh, man, no, that could offend people, or that was done, or it's off brief, it's off strategy. But, there's always a thoughtful way to say, man, there's something in that, but maybe we should flip it on its head and try something over here, or let's take a look at the brief again, right? But the last thing you want to do, if you care about that person, is see them go up and present that idea internally, or especially in front of a client, and have them feel the backlash of the room because of something that you knew inside your head was wrong with that idea, but you're being too polite or kind to say something. Because ultimately, I think it hurts that person tenfold, because you could do it in an intimate conversation and find a way to dance around it and make it a little bit better. But how horrifying if that person's in front of an internal check-in with all the people they care about impressing, or God forbid they're in a client meeting and the client is like, that is totally off strategy. So that was a lesson I definitely learned and try to hold true to it.
Yeah. I recently heard this quote, and it's very simple and it's so true, that clarity is kindness. And I really taken that to heart, because I realized that, sometimes, as you mentioned, you see somebody, the love in their eyes, or you just love that person and you don't want to hurt them, and telling them that their idea is bad or they're on the wrong track or something like that, you feel like that would hurt them. But what I've noticed is that when you are candid but kind with it and nice with it, they typically appreciate that more. I remember with my first co-founder at Blue Light Media, we were going through some of the assets that we were creating, and I noticed there was just like some inconsistencies that were that we couldn't have as the agency, in my opinion. And I was so nervous to share this with him. I sat on it and it was like this pit in my stomach. And I was like, dude, for one, I'm not a photographer or graphic designer. And so who am I to even talk to this person about it? And then for two, he was just somebody that I respected and loved. And I did not want to I didn't want to hurt him. And so, I created this deck. I was like, hey, here the work that you do that's like fantastic. Here's some of the outputs that have not been. So, and here are the specific reasons why. But the thing that I did, because you mentioned it in an intimate conversation, and I hope that the listener can maybe take this, is I pulled him out of the office, because I wasn't going to do it I definitely wasn't going to do it in like my office and make it seem like, I'm his boss. And I also didn't want the chance of somebody else hearing it that we worked with, and then, his respect being lost or something of that nature. So we went to coffee, we did it over coffee type of thing. And at the end of it, he's like, bro, I appreciate this so much. Like, thank you. And I for one, I just was so relieved. Right. But for two, just kind of speaks to what you were saying, is like, clarity is kindness, for one. And then for two, like finding that intimate moment where you can be, a little bit more candid with somebody, and then also finding somebody that you trust. And I would say that, he trusted me enough to go in business with me. So there's that. But he also, but I also trusted him in a moment to like not lash out. I was scared, but I trusted that he wouldn't do that. So yeah, that's a really interesting moment.
I'd love to just add something to that.
Yeah.
Where I think that type of thought in a moment that could be a very, very hard moment. It's a hard conversation, right? I've had hard conversations where someone was giving me information that was hard to hear. And when the thought went into how am I going to deliver this, where am I going to deliver this, meant a lot. Mm-hmm. So when I've had to have hard conversations, like I'll fly to another city to do it face to face. I'll sit with someone, or we'll go to an outdoor table, or we'll take a walk or something, right? So I love hearing that, because that is something that I've felt the power when it's been the hard conversation being had with me. And I also, when I knew I had to have a hard conversation, it was something that I thought, how can I build up that person with some way that this news or this conversation it needs to happen, but it doesn't need to happen without some thought. And it doesn't need to happen in a way that we can't build a cushion around that conversation to be respectful or kind. But I always admire leaders that, do that. Because, being the person that delivers that hard conversation, especially as a leader, like in an organization, like I've been on the other side, I've been laid off, and then I've also had to lay people off.
Yeah.
And sometimes being the person to deliver that news is harder than the person receiving it. Not in every case, right? So I have empathy for some of those folks too, but I when they have to deliver that news. But it's a big moment where you can either earn someone's respect or lose their respect if you take the time to think about the human that's going to be receiving that feedback or that information, and are you doing enough to think about building some support or at least a moment around that person to think about it as just not like, hard info. It's like a human conversation.
Yeah. So you've worked on some amazing campaigns that I'm a huge fan of. Obviously there's Star Wars, and I feel like I've beaten that to death. But the Marvel Mural Wars is the one that I'm also really interested in as well, because correct me if I'm wrong, were you at Instagram when you did that one?
Well, I was working at Facebook, but we were leaning, it was both Facebook and Instagram. Okay. So we were like constantly immersed in all of it.
Sure.
So that was Instagram specific, that campaign.
My initial maybe reaction when I hear somebody's working at Instagram or Facebook, obviously this is going to be like digital and social. Like, how does the idea come about to do like mural wars? This is like out of home, I guess you could say. And then, and it's not necessarily on the feed. How do you tie all of those things together for one, and then pitch that to the client and then, get buy-in from that? That's a big question as well. But
well, it was great. I mean, the thing about it was I was recruited to come into Facebook like a long time ago, when they were just starting to have a video product, if you can believe that. Mm-hmm. So for a long period of time, most of the brand communication was just still imagery. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to bring in some creative directors, and there was a handful of us, I think, at the time. The creative team that I was a part of was like 18 people, maybe globally. But they needed to start figuring out how to tell some of these stories for our partners that would leverage our platform in a unique way, as opposed to just like taking a TV spot or an in-theater trailer and popping it on the feed. How could we leverage what we were seeing being super effective on Instagram and then tie the brand story or studio story to it? So the Marvel story was that they really wanted to connect with, at the time, Latinx audience. And which, I mentioned earlier, my mother is Mexican-American, so spent a lot of time, shout out to Chula Vista down in the San Diego area, a lot of time in the area where my mother grew up, but also just culturally, half my footing in that space. And one of the things that I found beautiful is many times walls tell stories. I think in many cultures, but specifically in that one. And one thing that we noticed was that on Instagram at that time, stop motion was performing like incredibly well. So
And was that an insight that you have from Instagram and getting the
performance?
analytics?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and that was part of our role. I was on a team called the Creative Shop, and we would look at the analytics. We'd look at what was working. We'd work with the product team, but we also were a bunch of ex-creatives and strategists and producers. So our role was kind of like have one foot with the agency partners, but one foot in the product teams and one foot with the analytics. So understanding like what was working on the platforms, how was the product being built, and then how do we tie it into the stories that are happening in marketing hallways and creative hallways. But to get to that point was a lot of work. Shout out to Carrie Lakin and some of the folks that were there early on, because, for instance, Disney, who was the partner, that we worked with on Marvel, it took a lot of time to get them to understand, and this is early on, that the golden trailer, like the 90-second, 3-minute trailer that works beautifully in a theater is not going to work on a phone.
Right.
And, right now we all are very used to fragmented content or fast-paced content, 6 to 15 seconds. But a number of years ago, that was like, well, how are we going to tell our story? We want to tell our, Captain America story. We want to start with the character narrative and this. And to the studio partners' credit, it was a lot of meetings figuring out, look, this is how people are absorbing content now. If we want to bring people into your story, we got to figure out how to get them to actually stop their thumb and pay enough attention to what you're putting out there to bring them into the longer form. So that Marvel project for Captain America was obviously about Iron Man and Captain America going head to head, right? And the root of that idea, and a shout out to the team I was working with at that time, the entertainment crew. But I was like, hey, what if we worked with muralists or graffiti artists? We had worked with an incredible artist named Haste and his crew. And we found a location downtown LA, and one side of the building was going to be Cap's side, and the other side was going to be Iron Man's side. And working with this group, Jeb and Berg and an entire group that really know that art form. Mm-hmm. We, over the course of 2 days, did a mural that came to life. You'd paint one motion, arm, this, paint over, paint over, paint over, paint over, paint over, paint. We had these, giant cranes that were going up and down, and we had locked off shots. This allowed us to, over the course of 2 days, tell a stop motion story of these two walls going to battle with each other. And we had to battle like rain that was happening and stuff. But what I was going to say is that the purpose was that when it ultimately landed in feed for Instagram, people were like, oh, wow, that looks cool. That looks like other stuff that I love here. And, it was...
Here being Instagram.
Mm-hmm. And, Captain America and this, all the characters coming to life, doing stuff as graffiti art on a wall, going to war with each other, told the story that was not on film, meaning it didn't look anything like what the actual, Marvel piece was going to look like. But it got people talking and it got people interested. And for us, it was a beautiful use of the platform because it was very in line with what was resonating with the stories being told on the platform at that time. But we inserted the Marvel story. Wow. And it was... fingers crossed. We hope it works because we truly believe in this, and thankfully it worked really, really well. We measured intent, like to see the film and all this stuff, and it was very, very strong. But that was one of the first ones where we really proved, like, let's break the mold of the golden trailer and let's figure out a way to tell these stories in ways that stories that are really resonating on Instagram, we can learn from it and apply that.
Yeah. And Civil War was one of the best the best Captain America movie, and up there in my top 5 Marvel movies for sure. It was
fun. And getting to meet the Russo brothers and work with that group was amazing. And they were so generous with us too. We didn't work with the talent specifically, but we offered some suggestions on how they could have the two sets of celebrity talent battle each other for like push-up contests and all this stuff. So But to the Marvel team and the Disney team, they were incredible partners, always were, and really, really kind of helped us break some new ground as far as the way entertainment stories were being told on those platforms.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. So now you're spending a lot of time, kind of helping the next generation of creatives and marketers find their footing in their careers. And I'd love to learn about, like, kind of from a high level, what does that cohort look like? And what are some of the things that people can take away from that?
Well, we met at USC, right?
Right.
We met on a career panel there, and I've been fortunate to work with like LMU and taught at Emerson. Used to teach at UNC. Now having conversation with NYU, like incredible places, right? And incredible talent. The people that are coming out of these schools are incredible, and I see a level of anxiety right now for a lot of these soon-to-be grads or recent grads where, they're struggling to figure out, like, how do I gain some traction or some footing or unlock a door into the industry? And for me, when I graduated from school, like, it really, the anxiety was less, am I going to get a job? It was like, am I going to really love the job that I get, right? Versus like, no, will I get a job? And one stat that I just recently read was that 40% of college graduates right now, like early college graduates, are working in a job that doesn't need a college degree, where if you combine that with the average cost of a four-year university right now is $240,000. So a lot of these graduates are going to be saddled with debt and trying to figure out how to build themselves out of that. Yeah. So for me, my passion right now is helping a lot of this generation figure out how to find their footing, how to find that traction in, because a lot of times they put in an incredible amount of work, and the body of work that they have, if it's creative, they want to get into creative, their portfolios or their sites, or if they want to get into marketing, the projects that they've done, incredible. But having been a hiring manager for decades and having hired probably hundreds of people over the course of my career, it's interesting how quickly you can be dismissed if you haven't put enough time in thinking about, we were talking about a little bit earlier, personal branding, how you position yourself. How do you choose to showcase your experience? How much are you putting yourself out there? What are the things that you care about? Like, I walk through a lot of times with these students or early graduates a value-based exercise. Like, what do you value truly? Where are you going to place your time? What are your non-negotiables? Work a lot on inner tech. Like, how are we wired? If you pick
inner tech. Did you coin that?
I don't know where I picked it up. It's just, what's your inner tech? Yeah. But the thought, like, if you go to Best Buy and you look at iPhones, like, all the iPhones are probably going to be pretty similar, right? But if you look at 100 candidates, like, everyone's going to be slightly different. But I think it's up to that candidate or that person and mentors or people that partner with them to figure out, what are your superpowers? What are the things that make you unique? What makes you stand out? So that we can put that at the forefront. So as a hiring manager, you're looking at stuff like this fast. And very quickly, I think about all the magical people I probably missed because their stuff wasn't put together in a way where I saw it like window dressing in a store. Like, like if what's in the window isn't going to grab your eye, then you're not going to enter into the store to see what's inside. And I feel for a lot of these students who've spent so much time learning case studies and learning from brands and learning about all these industries and icons in the industry, but they haven't spent any time really looking and learning about themselves. So a lot of the work that we do at right now is working with that group to self-explore, understand how their inner tech is wired, and then plug that into, like, the gap or the opportunities in the industry.
Yeah. That personal branding piece is huge. I'm such a huge advocate for that. I honestly credit personal branding to a lot of the opportunities that I was afforded in my time at Blue Light, and the successes to my team for sure. But like, the opportunities were there because I was shameless enough to like
Yeah.
put myself out there type of thing. And so I love that you're sharing that with your cohort and the people that are, make the great decision of learning from you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate look, anybody, I'm always open to have a conversation. Doesn't even have to plug into the system or anything. Just like the site is gilmartincoaching.com. There's a way to book some time. I'm always like, anybody, if you're out there, it doesn't matter what level too. I talk to folks that are in college or early grads or people that have been in the business for a long period of time. Always happy to have a conversation, to just share what I can. And then if there are connections to be had, share those as I can as well. But, it's not necessarily the easiest business to break into, especially right now. I think I just saw a stat from Glassdoor that said for every entry level position right now, within, I think it was 24 to 48 hours, there's an average of 500 to 1,000 applications to every entry level position at a place that, is somewhat well regarded or elite, right?
Sure.
But I was talking to someone who was a hiring manager at one of those places, and he was throwing his arms up because he said 50% of these applications aren't even real humans.
Oh.
Yeah. And, or real valid candidates. Or they are, so manipulated in the way that they've used AI to flesh out their resume to sound just like the job description, that when they actually have the conversation, there isn't necessarily a true connection.
Yeah.
So you have all these folks that truly are probably qualified, who could be the right candidate, but they're completely lost in the swirl of this AI job application process. And one stat that struck me from Forbes was, I think it was something like 78% of jobs being filled right now are being filled because of a human connection.
Yeah.
Somebody knows somebody, or someone reached out on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I see that you're connected to so-and-so. Would you mind?" And the kindness, as we were talking before, the kindness of someone saying, "Sure, like I'll take 28 seconds out of my day or a minute and a half and just say, hey, this person's looking to connect with someone at this place. Would you mind having a conversation?" That's it. Literally less than 2 minutes could change the course of somebody's life. Yeah. But you also have to be, if you're in that mode, willing to put yourself into that motion. And a lot of people are just terrified.
Yeah.
But, if you put out 100 messages, reach out 100 people, I'm guessing like 80 will either say, "I'm sorry, I'm too busy," or like reach out maybe a little bit later, or sure, maybe 20% may not get back to you, or maybe we're like, I have a curt response, but that's very rare.
Yeah.
Very rare. If anything, maybe you don't get an answer back. And sometimes my heart drops on LinkedIn because I'll see a message that someone messaged me in like 2015.
Oh no.
And I'm like, I didn't mean to not get back to you. I was just busy. Something was probably exploding at work or something was happening. I always reach out and say, hey, this is like a decade late, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry I left you unresponded, and I hope all's well.
Yeah.
But what that is a signal of is sometimes if you're not getting a message back, it's not because they think less of you or, you're not talented enough. It's just someone's dealing with their own stuff in the hallways.
Yeah.
So,
man, I know you to be an incredibly helpful person. And sometimes you deliver so much value where I'm just like, how do I repay this? So I'm excited to at least buy you a sandwich in a little bit here.
I'm looking forward to that sandwich. But even just, what I appreciate is the invite today. One, to just learn a little bit more about you too, and get to see Blue Light, which is amazing. We can share some Star Wars nerddom too. But I think I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk about this passion that I have to help this next generation of creative and marketing students. Yeah. And also, truth be told, one of the things that's really been inspiring to me is having conversations with the parents. And I know, congratulations on the second.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I have 3 now who are, got 2 of them that are taller than me now. And we're starting to have some of these conversations about what is their future path and where do they go. And I'm so proud of all of them in so many different ways and seeing them flourish in different ways too. But as a parent, trying to figure out what do you do to help them find their way, and what's the best opportunity for them. And, a lot of these parents, as I was talking about before, with the students who they have seen grow up, and maybe they've even invested in elementary school and then middle school and then high school and then college. And many times that $250,000 is from their pocket, or even a third of parents right now are pulling from 401k or from savings to put their kids in school. But what I was going to say is that what has been eye-opening too is the anxiety, not just on the students level, but also on the parents who care so deeply about their kid,
of course,
and their future. And it's really important to me too to figure out ways to provide that partnership, because again, there's, I think many times those family units are partnership, and the parents really want that candidate or kid to succeed too. And if I hadn't been in the creative industry for the last 30 years, the advice, and especially I would say, especially in the last 5 or 6, the advice that I'd be giving my own kid might be totally outdated, and not right. So inadvertently, I might be giving them advice on how to land a job that was going to make them stick out and actually not land the job.
Right.
So that's been really important to me, and a big part of it. So I've loved it, and appreciate you allowing me to, one, talk about the story of getting here, but also talk about the passion of helping other people find their own paths and their own stories.
Of course. You did mention the site, if you wouldn't mind plugging it again. And also, if somebody, wanted to connect with you, where else can they find you?
Well, great. Well, I think the site itself is gilmartincoaching.com, and that you can go in and just see everything. We do cohorts. We also do one-on-one coaching. Some incredible students right now, or recent grads that I'm working with as well. And then also, if you're a university or organization, doing a lot of sessions where we go on campus and we work with a large group and give them kind of a 5-step method of not only self-exploration, working on the USP, but then really applying that branding throughout all the materials, whether that's the LinkedIn or the sites, and then tons and tons of interview prep. But I'm really also incredibly driven to not only have people arrive in the industry, but then thrive in the industry. So some of the lessons that I learned early on are, you might have a creative director that's incredible at building stories and building brand metrics and all this stuff, but as a people manager, absolutely atrocious, right? And no fault of their own, it's just not how they're wired, or maybe not where their priority is. So I think helping this generation learn how to have their hands on the steering wheel of their own career a little bit. How do they formulate and guide the one-on-ones where they kind of take control of the one-on-one? What are the goals that they're aligning with their manager? What are the 4 goals I should work on in the next 6 months so that I drive the right impact for you and the team? How are we being calibrated? Is there a rubric for every level of the organization? What level am I, and what things do I need to know that I have to deliver to not only meet all, but exceed or greatly exceed, or redefine those ratings? Too often, I think people, especially in this younger generation, just show up being appreciative of having a role. But you have to understand, this generation of, recent grads, 21 to 25, right? Like, as someone who's been in the industry for a while, they have the superpower, the secret sauce, because that's typically the audience every brand wants to talk to. So giving them the confidence to understand that there's a reason why they're in that hallway, and they should have the voice to speak up. Because someone who has been in the industry for a long period of time, who might have the stature because of a name on the door or a title, but they may not have the insight. And I think that's what this generation has to realize, is they should have the confidence to speak up and showcase that insight. They should be dabbling with all the AI tools. They don't have to be super proficient, but just play with this, because a lot of the folks that are in those positions that have been in there for a long period of time, they've been too busy just doing the career, like balancing the org or budgets or strategy or whatever it is, Q4 numbers they got to hit. and that this new generation can come in and fill a gap that's there. But at the same time, the last situation you want to be in and this happened to me, where you work really, really hard for 6 months and you're having one-on-ones with your manager, and the manager is like super nice. Like, hey, how was the week? It was great. What'd you do? It was great. Oh, cool. The summer's awesome. Yeah, this is great. Okay, we'll see you next week. And you're like, all right. And then you have like 20 of those meetings, and then your review comes out. They're like, well, unfortunately, really weren't able to work on anything that really stuck out. And you're like, wait, I was working on these 15 things and I didn't know like where I should be applying it. Where if I had learned early on of like, no, like be in control of that one-on-one, sit with that person and say, hey, let's outline 4 goals. And then every week, hey, this is where I'm at this goal. And this is where and always have an open document on your desktop with, okay, I've increased engagement by 15%. I noted that. Oh, I just helped unlock a totally new client that's going to bring in another $1 million in revenue for our group. Oh, that's great. So that you can help that manager. Because again, maybe it's not their strong suit, but you give them a cheat sheet for when there is that review and they have to work with other managers to figure out who gets the best rating. You're giving them a play card.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, this person hit 13% increased engagement. They brought in 3 new clients. They raised their hand for this very important initiative that we know as a leadership is paramount to our success. But without the foresight, you may be totally ghosted. Literally all of that work might just be ghosted, and you could be left behind. So I'm really passionate not only helping people get in, but once they're in, thrive in. And I think having some of the insight, I call it the cheat code, like career cheat code or an unfair insight advantage. It's just because some of us, who have been in it for so many years and so many rounds, like what just comes natural to us is avoid that minefield or avoid that pothole, may not be something that's on someone's radar. And hopefully with the work to be done, we can help people either, lose years on their career or maybe, some painful moments. So yeah, that's what gets me up in the morning and gets me excited. So.
Man, I love that, Tom. Thank you so much for your time. And, to the listener, thank you so much for your time and attention, and the viewer. If you loved the episode, we would dig a 5-star review. If you didn't like it that much, feel free to stick it to us, but subscribe anyway, because we're going to have a ton of incredible people just like Tom Gilmartin back on the show.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
That was tight.
Good.
Keep that. That was tight.